in 1895 because my mother was born in 1896. And I have a picture of them right here. This is Melvin at age 5 and my mother at age 3. Which is also a very good picture. And they lived down in Haywarden, down in the southeast corner of South Dakota, right along Hudson, somewhere in there, next to the river, I guess, when my mother was small. This was before they owned a farm. And this is my mother's other brother, Lloyd. He ended up on the home farm and farmed there all his life. And he passed away in 1976. That's probably my favorite uncle. This is her sister Mary. She's still living. She lives at her and her husband Tut. His last name is Tuttle. They live at Letcher, South Dakota. They have one son, Melvin, that lives out in Arizona, I believe, and he has about 4 children, I believe. And I do have a picture of my mother, and I don't know, I'm sure this was probably about the time she was married. She didn't get married till she was 26 years old. Okay. And the only picture I have of my father, well, I guess they didn't have cameras, or didn't use many cameras, but I do have a picture of him. I think there was another person on this picture, but it's been cut off. But this is about the only decent picture I have of my father. And this was probably maybe a year or 2 before he died. I see on the back it says 1940, and he died in 41. Okay, why don't you stop just a minute? I have one more picture of my mother, probably taken when she was 65, somewhere in that. I just thought I'd show it to you. And then I haven't mentioned she had a sister, Pearl. Looked a lot like my mother. She lived in, she married a fellow and they moved to St. Paul, Minnesota, and had a family of 5 kids. And all 5 of them still live in the St. Paul area. We see them once in a while. I have a photo here, I think that was the same time that I showed you that picture of my dad, and I'll show it to you. So it's a little fuzzy, but here is my grandma, and kind of a group picture, the Helen family. My Aunt Pearl is in this picture. It's the only picture I have of her. That's her right there. Grandma. This is my Aunt Fern. My Uncle Lloyd. My dad, you see the top of his face there. My Aunt Mary. My mother don't seem to be on that picture. My brother Jim and some of the little kids here. I really don't even see myself on that one. My mother was probably changing my pants or something. I think everybody but my mother and I are on that picture. Alright. And I still have another one taking a few years later down at... My Aunt Fern was the only one in the family that had a camera, so she took most of the pictures. And I don't know if this will come in very good, but it's a little clearer picture, but smaller. I can read the names across the bottom. Kids in the front, there's Esther, Myrna, Paul, Jim, Joe, and me. In the back row is Carmen, that's my aunt's sister, my mother, Helen, my sister Helen, Lloyd, Aunt Mary, Grandma, my brother Gene, Tut, and Eddie Benjamin. All right. I have a couple more pictures. I've got a, there's no, I have a picture of my brother Gene. This is his graduation picture from high school. I just happen to have it laying here, so I thought I'd show it to you. He was 6'4" when he graduated from high school. I think when he started high school, he was just quite young, or quite small. I think he started the high school even when he was, well, he graduated when he was 16, so he couldn't have been more than 13 when he started high school. But he grew terribly fast when he was in high school, and when he graduated, he was 6'4". And he had the brains in the family. He graduated as valedictorian of his class of 66. And one other picture that I think it's a pretty good picture. It's a picture of my brother and I and my sister when we were probably, I must have been probably 10, my brother 12, 11, 12, and Myrna 7 or 8. I don't know, my mother, for some reason, took us to town, had a picture taken. It turned out quite well. There's quite a few copies of this around. Okay, that's all the pictures I'm going to show you. I guess I'll get back to where some of the things my mother told me about her family. Her and her brother, oldest brother, were born down in southeast part of the state, and then they moved up to a little closer to Fedora. I think they lived in Coleman. I suppose he did carpenter work, and then eventually they bought a quarter of land, which is located a mile east and 4 miles south of Fedora, South Dakota. It was a raw quarter, wasn't broke. My grandpa hired the land broke. It wasn't a home. He wasn't homesteading it, but it hadn't been broke. And he built a 2-room house similar to these 2 rooms on this house here to start with, and eventually added onto it a couple times, and that house is still there, and my aunt lived in it till just last year when she moved to California. But as I said, the kids helped with the farm work, and my grandpa did carpenter work all his life. My mother's oldest brother, Melvin, he served in the First World War, and shortly after he got out, he married, and they had 2 children, Darlene and Ardith, 2 daughters. The one daughter, Ardith, lives somewhere on the west coast now, and his other daughter, Darlene, lives north of DeSmet, South Dakota, or south of DeSmet, between Howard and DeSmet on the farm. Her name is, she married a fellow named Norman Erland, and they have 2 children, a boy and a girl. Ardith, she had 3 or 4 children. I'm not sure how many. I've seen her probably 2 or 3 times in the last 30 years. Now, I'll go on to my, I guess I did cover some about my Aunt Pearl, but she passed away probably in 1985, I believe it was. And she said she has five kids up in the St. Paul area. They've been city kids all their life. They used to come down here in the summertime and stay with us or my uncle at Fedora, and they enjoyed the farm life, and we had lots of fun with them. One of her daughters was about my age. They all were all older than I, except the one girl was my sister's age. But her and her husband have 8 girls, and I did see them this spring. 2 or 3 of the girls are married now, but she's had a busy life raising 8 girls. I think the youngest one is probably 14 or 15 now. 2 or 3 of them are married. I mentioned about my Aunt Mary already. They live in Fletcher. My Uncle Lloyd, who I said was probably my favorite uncle, he lived on the home farm, and his wife's name was Fern, and she lived there till last year. Her health was getting bad, and she decided that it was time to leave the farm. She was there in the wintertime, and sometimes she'd be snowed in, but I think she turned 81. She decided that her health wasn't real good. She moved out to California and is living with her daughter June. She had 3 children. The oldest boy, Paul, is about my age, has been living in Colorado, but recently has moved to Texas, and he's an engineer. He's just changed jobs. He's had quite a bit of health problems in the last few years, and I guess he's probably lucky to be alive. He's gallbladder trouble, and his health isn't the best. And their daughter Esther, we always called her Carrot Top. She had fiery red hair. She died in 1981 or 1980, fall of 1980. But she has 2 boys, and they are both doctors. One of them, I believe, is in Florida, and the other one is in Ohio. And June Marie, the youngest of their 3 children, lives in California. She has one daughter that lives out in that area. And, as I said, her mother is living with her now. Paul also has one daughter. Then I guess that boils down to my mother, and I have a cassette tape I played just recently that a year or 2 before she died, I got her to give me a few thoughts and history of her and her family, and I'll just try and mention a few things she said in that. She went to school around Fedora, grade school, and there wasn't any opportunity for her to go to high school. There was no high school down there, so she said she took the 8th grade twice and was staying home, and then she decided that she'd get into teaching, so she took the teacher's exam with just a 8th grade education and passed it. She taught probably about 4 or 5 years around the neighborhood down by Fedora, and there was a family that lived at Fedora that moved out here, the Cowden family, they were neighbors at Fedora, and one summer she decided that she'd come out here and visit her Leah Cowden, a friend she had in Fedora, and that's how she came out to this country. She was visiting down there, and she happened to mention about she wouldn't mind teaching out here, and Mr. Cowden got on the telephone and called somebody he knew that needed a teacher, and they come down and hired my mother on the spot. So that's how she ended up out here. She just was out here visiting. The friend she come out to visit, they later ended up being sister-in-laws. They married brothers. Leah married Frank Swanson, and my mother married Elvis. She taught a couple of schools out here, the Foggerhog School, the Wilman School. I suppose that was in 1920, 1921. And then she met my dad, and they were married, and I don't believe married at that time. They wouldn't hire a married person or woman to be a teacher, I suppose, unless they were. I suppose if they were hard up for teachers, they might have made some exceptions, but they didn't at that time. But anyway, they were married, and my dad was building a set of buildings where I live now. And I think I mentioned yesterday that they lived with his brother and his wife while my dad was finishing the farm, and that would have been in 1922. Which time do we have? I was about done. Story that I thought I'd tell about my mother told, and it's on that cassette tape, but this was before she met my dad out here, and she was telling they used to have literaries and spell downs and this type of things, and debates in the neighborhood. And she tells a story about she'd gone to a literary, and they had them in the schools in the evening, and after they'd eaten lunch, somebody passed out peanuts in a shell, and they started throwing peanut shells around, they're wobbling, and all at once one hit her in the eye, and my dad had thrown it, and it caused her eye to water the rest of the evening. And that was how they met. My dad hit her in the eye with a peanut. One of her friends, a few years later, they were talking about this story, and her friend says, "Well, you got even with him, you married him." So that was one of her stories. I think we'll just probably stop now, and there's a little bit of film left on the end of this roll, and maybe at some point in time I'll add something at another time.